Today I'd like to talk about the end of chapter 8 of the Gospel of Matthew. A very interesting story, very different kind of story that we find there. It's called the healing of the Gadarene demoniacs. And it's verses 28 to 34 of chapter 8. It says, when he came to the other side, to the territory of the Gadarenes, two demoniacs who were coming from the tombs met him. They were so savage that no one could travel by that road. As you read that, you get this scary sort of feeling that this is going to be a very difficult encounter. Um, there's not just one demoniac, someone possessed by a demon, but there are two. So that's going to be a challenge. You're coming into a whole new territory on the other side of the sea, and then these demoniacs are so savage that people just totally avoided the road. So they just didn't even want to go anywhere near these demoniacs. So this is going to be not an easy encounter for Jesus, obviously. There are some differences with regard to the town here in Mark and in Luke. The town of Gadara was about 5 miles southeast of the Sea of Galilee. So the exact location could be difficult. You would expect something a little bit closer than the 5 miles to the Sea of Galilee because he's on the other side. And but it could have been down the road a bit, a road obviously that was not too well traveled. Tombs. So they're coming out of the tombs. Tombs frequently would symbolize evil. So what you're dealing with here when they're coming out of the tombs is they're coming from an evil place. In the ancient world, uh, particularly repulsive illnesses that exhibited unusual symptoms and for which there was no explanation would be attributed to demons. So if you didn't know the origin of the illness, you weren't aware of it, and there was some confusion about it, well, that illness was caused by a demon. So frequently, some of these things were not able to be diagnosed, certainly certain mental conditions. Just think of a schizophrenia and just think of the difficulty in diagnosing it, first of all. But then in ancient times, how much more difficult schizophrenia would have been to diagnose. It's very difficult to attribute some of these conditions to any specific illness that we find described in the scriptures. We certainly don't have enough background information. A lot of times there would have to be certain tests that are run to determine effectively what the illness was, and certainly none of that was available at the time. Mental illness was many times the illness that was chosen rather than a physical illness. So the demoniacs would frequently be guilty of or found to be victims of or have symptoms of these types of various mental illnesses. Uh, Jesus tries really in his ministry always to liberate people from the fear of demons. And you can see in this story certainly the overtones of fear. They're coming from the tomb, they're savage, there's two of them. It's a road that nobody travels because nobody wants to encounter these demoniacs. So you can see that the fear factor would be very high. And one of the things that we see in the ministry of Jesus is that idea of trying to help us to overcome our fears. Jesus frequently says, do not be afraid. Do not let fear dominate your life. Trust trust in God. Try to overcome those fears by placing your trust in God. And I think we all know in our own personal lives the difficulties with fears. A lot of times, a certain fear can inhibit us from trying to achieve something. And when we overcome that fear, we're like, gee, this wasn't so difficult to do after all. Why did I have this fear? And Jesus is trying to minister to us constantly so that we can overcome those fears. Demons really, as we look at Jesus very carefully and his ministry, demons have no power and are instantly subdued by a word from Jesus. So the power of Jesus' word is much greater than the power of any demons. And really what the scriptures are trying to say to us is the power of God overcomes all of these other powers. And as we reflect on our own lives, as we reflect on reality today, we can see the wisdom in that. There are different powers in the world. There are certainly military powers. There are powers in criminal cartels. There are powers of terrorists, and all of these different powers that are engaging in conflict, trying to overcome us, trying to scare us. And we look at all of that, we say, well, wait a minute. We have those powers. But then over here we have the power of God, and the power of God has overcome all of those other powers. It might seem in the short term that it does not, that this person is very powerful. But we look back upon all of the people in the world who were supposedly so powerful and so mighty. That power and that might is very temporary. If it lasts 30 years, 40, 50, 60, 70 years, that might be a lot. But in the long term, when we look at that type of power and we compare it with the power of God, we see it's very minimal. God's power is much stronger, and God's power overcomes those other powers which frequently fade after a certain period of time. So this story raises the question about exorcisms. What is the significance of an exorcism? Not that Christians should or should not believe in demons and their power, but the Christian should treat demonic power as non-existent. There is only one power which the people must reckon with, and that is the power of God. So when we think of supposed power of the demons, that power is nothing compared with the power of God. And that is the message that Jesus wants to give us. Trust in God's power. That power has overcome demonic power. That power has overcome the power of evil. That power is much stronger, the power of God, than these other powers. And of course, we see this quite consistently in our history with, for example, martyrs who face down emperors and rulers, who face down terrorists. And it's so interesting that the names of those martyrs are remembered long after the names of the supposedly powerful people have been forgotten, because we cherish the power of their example and their faith in Christ and their reliance on the true power of God, which has overcome this other power. So really, as we look at this story initially, it is a story about power. What power will I trust? Will I trust in the power of God? Will I trust in the power of Jesus? Or is there another power in the world that I think is more important and that I live my life by? What is the true power that I should follow?